Trump's presidency, the death of the Anglo-American world power myth. The idea of an Anglo-American world power, two nations acting as one unified global hegemon, has been a persistent narrative in geopolitics and even some religious interpretations of world events, like those of Jehovah's Witnesses. They claim that the small horn in Daniel 7 and 8 represent an Anglo-American world power existing for more than 100 years. For example, this is their interpretation. The seventh world power gained still greater strength when the United States of America collaborated with Britain to form the Anglo-American dual world power. Economically and militarily, this power had indeed become a king fierce in countenance. The small horn that became a fierce political power in the time of the end, then, is the Anglo-American world power. They also claim it will remain till the end. But what does Trump's presidency really reveal about this partnership? It doesn't truly seem as fundamental and unbreakable as claimed. Or really, was there ever a dual Anglo-American world power? Enter Donald Trump, both his first term from 2017 to 2021 and his current second term beginning in 2025. If any presidency has exposed the Anglo-American world power as mythology rather than reality, it's this one. Today, we're examining how Trump's approach to Britain, NATO, and international relations systematically dismantles the idea that the US and UK function as a unified geopolitical entity. Let's look at the evidence. First, understand Trump's fundamental approach to international relations. Everything is transactional. Alliances aren't sacred bonds, they're business arrangements that must benefit America directly and measurably. This philosophy directly contradicts the special relationship narrative, which assumes an almost familial bond transcending normal cost-benefit calculations. According to the Anglo-American world power theory, the US and UK would make decisions together, prioritize each other's interests, and present a unified front globally. Trump has never operated this way with any country, including Britain. During his first term, Trump repeatedly criticized NATO allies, including Britain, for not spending enough on defense. He questioned the value of NATO itself, calling it obsolete, before later walking that back slightly. He publicly suggested the US might not defend allies who don't pay their bills. Think about that. If an Anglo-American world power existed, a unified hegemonic force, would an American president publicly question the entire alliance structure binding these supposed partners? Would he treat Britain as just another country that needs to prove its worth? When Britain voted for Brexit in 2016, many Leave campaigners promised that the special relationship would deliver a fantastic US-UK trade deal to replace EU access. Trump himself encouraged Brexit and suggested a great deal was coming. What happened? Despite Trump's personal support for Brexit and his friendly relationship with Nigel Farage and initially with Boris Johnson, no comprehensive US-UK trade deal materialized during his entire first term. Negotiations stalled over agriculture standards, particularly chlorinated chicken and hormone-treated beef, issues where America refused to compromise its commercial interests for Britain's concerns. Trump explicitly told Theresa May in 2018 that her Brexit plan might kill prospects for a US-UK trade deal. He publicly criticized her handling of Brexit, an extraordinary intervention in an ally's domestic politics. If an Anglo-American world power existed, wouldn't America have immediately offered Britain favorable terms to cushion Brexit's impact? Wouldn't maintaining British strength be a core American strategic interest, worth some commercial concessions? Instead, Trump treated Britain like any other trade partner, perhaps with friendly rhetoric, but with hard-nosed negotiating focused purely on American advantage. Now let's turn to Trump's current second term, which has taken the demolition of special relationship mythology even further. In 2025, Trump has implemented or threatened sweeping tariffs on allies and adversaries alike. His America First economic nationalism makes no exception for Britain. When Trump announced broad tariff policies, Britain faced the same treatment as other countries, no special exemption, no privileged status. Compare this to how a genuine unified power structure works. Look at the European Union. Member states don't impose tariffs on each other. There's a common external tariff. Free movement of goods is fundamental. That's what economic integration within a unified power bloc looks like. The US and UK. Trump has been willing to engage in trade disputes with Britain just as readily as with China or the EU. There's no common market, no currency union, no automatic privileged access. In fact, Trump has often seemed warmer toward authoritarian leaders like Viktor Orbán, Vladimir Putin, or Kim Jong-un than toward traditional democratic allies including Britain. His friendships are personal and transactional, not based on alliance structures or shared democratic values. Trump's approach to NATO further demolishes the Anglo-American world power concept. Throughout both terms, Trump has demanded NATO members increase defense spending to 2% of GDP minimum, and he's applied this demand to Britain too. While Britain does meet the 2% threshold, unlike Germany or Canada during much of this period, Trump's rhetoric makes clear he views NATO as a protection racket where allies must pay for American defense. In 2025, Trump has renewed threats that the US might not defend NATO allies who don't spend enough. He suggested European nations should handle their own defense more, particularly regarding Ukraine. This isn't how a unified world power operates. Imagine if California demanded that New York pay more for national defense, or threatened to withdraw military protection from Texas over budget contributions. It's absurd because they're parts of one nation. If the Anglo-American World Power were real, defense would be a joint project with integrated planning and shared burden based on collective interest, not a transactional exchange where one partner constantly threatens to abandon the other. Some might argue that Trump had good personal chemistry with Boris Johnson, and that represents the special relationship. But this actually proves the opposite point. Trump's relationship with British leaders has been entirely personality dependent and had minimal policy impact. He feuded with Theresa May, calling her Brexit approach weak. He got along better with Johnson initially, but this didn't translate into the promised trade deal or special policy coordination. Trump largely ignored Britain's concerns about Iran policy when he withdrew from the nuclear deal. Britain wanted to preserve the agreement. Trump didn't care about British preferences. On climate change, Britain remained committed to the Paris Agreement. Trump withdrew America, showing zero concern for British policy positions. On Huawei and 5G networks, Trump pressured Britain to exclude the Chinese company, but Britain initially resisted, hardly the behavior of a unified power structure. Eventually Britain complied, but only after significant pressure, demonstrating subordination rather than partnership. Compare this to how the EU makes decisions, through institutional processes binding all members. Or how states within the US federal system operate, under constitutional structures requiring coordination. The US and UK have no such binding mechanisms, just voluntary cooperation that changes with each administration's whims. Perhaps nowhere is the absence of an Anglo-American world power clearer than in recent Ukraine policy. Britain, under Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and Rishi Sunak, took a strong, consistent pro-Ukraine stance following Russia's 2022 invasion. Britain provided substantial military aid, training, and diplomatic support. This represented clear British strategic thinking: prevent Russian expansionism, support European security, uphold international law. Trump's position? Much more ambiguous. He's criticized the scale of US aid to Ukraine, suggested he could end the war quickly by negotiating with Putin, and questioned why America should care more about Ukraine's borders than its own. In 2025, Trump has indicated willingness to pressure Ukraine into territorial concessions to Russia, a position Britain has strongly opposed. British leaders have expressed concerns about American reliability. If an Anglo-American world power existed, wouldn't the two nations have identical strategic positions on the most significant European security crisis in decades? Wouldn't they coordinate closely and present a unified position? Instead, we see potential strategic divergence, with Britain worried about American abandonment of commitments and Trump viewing Ukraine primarily through a domestic political lens. Trump's presidency, both terms, reveals several fundamental truths that contradict the Anglo-American world power narrative. No institutional integration. Unlike genuine political unions, the US federal system, the EU, the US-UK relationship has no binding institutional frameworks. It's entirely voluntary and changes dramatically with electoral outcomes. Divergent interests, on trade, climate, Iran, defense spending, and Ukraine, the US and UK often have different priorities. They negotiate like separate powers, because they are. American dominance, not partnership. When the US and UK disagree, America does what it wants regardless of British concerns. This isn't partnership, it's hegemony with a polite junior ally. Personality over structure. The relationship's quality depends entirely on personal chemistry between leaders, proof it's not institutionalized or foundational. Economic separation, no common currency, no free trade agreement, no economic union. Compare this to genuine unified powers. The Anglo-American world power concept requires believing that two sovereign nations with separate governments, separate economies, separate militaries, separate foreign policies, and frequently conflicting interests somehow function as one unified global hegemon. Trump's presidency exposes this as nonsense. He treats Britain like he treats other allies, sometimes warmly when it suits him, sometimes dismissively when it doesn't, always transactionally, never as an inseparable partner. If the special relationship can be this easily disrupted by one president's personality and policy preferences, it was never the fundamental force claimed. Real power structures, federations, unions, empires, don't dissolve based on who wins an election. The US and UK are allies with cultural connections and some security cooperation. But they're separate powers with separate interests, and Trump's America First approach has made this undeniable. The Anglo-American world power isn't in decline. It never existed. Trump hasn't destroyed it, he simply stopped pretending it was real. And that, paradoxically, might be his most honest contribution to understanding international relations. Also Bible prophecy about the identity of the small horn. In fact, it seems more likely that Donald Trump himself is the small horn in Daniel 7 and 8.
I hope you enjoyed the video and make sure to check out my other videos on this channel. Thanks for watching and see you next time.